No, it didn't say that to me. That's interesting.
It would be cool if it did that to you.
I would like to know, yeah. And I see it says connecting.
Connecting. I think that means we just wait.
That's interesting. I wonder what's happening on the. Oh, there we go. Hey, Zach's
Hello.
Android. I wish that were really Zach's Android.
Oh, like a robot?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Live at Noon today with me, your host, Chris Best, CEO of Substack, and Mills Baker, international man of mystery, uh, head of design. Uh, what other good title should you have in this?
Ever since my mother-in-law observed that New Orleans makes me more legible, I always say that I'm from New Orleans fairly early on in meeting people because
Hmm.
I hope that it might just make things contextually saner, you know?
Coolest New Orleans person.
Oh no. No, 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 no. I'm like, oh, Chris, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I don't know if this is how you feel in Canada, but I am like an intergalactic nerd in New Orleans. I'm like off the charts bad on every axis down here. It's really grim.
This is why this is the perfect milieu for you. You get to be in tech where you are a jock.
Yes, yes,
You
this
like
is
know
it.
when football is happening.
Yes, I watched football last night with a friend. We screamed at the television, you know? It's the
That's
real
so cool,
deal.
man. All right, I should tell everybody that I had a filling this morning. So if I talk like a very strange person, that's why. And Mills, you have something to tell me about Rene Girard.
Well, in fairness, you asked if I had anything on the mind, and I was working on a post. I'm trying to post again. I don't know.
Hell yeah.
I think Jasmine was the last person who roasted me for this. I think it's been maybe a year, 10 months or something. But and I'm really worried. I've asked Chat GPT this question many times. Has someone already said this? Has someone already written this? Because as you know, because you work with me, that I'm a dilettante. I like to know enough about an area to satisfy my curiosity, but I never have truly deep mastery of any domain or zone. And so I often worry that what I'm writing is, really common knowledge and has been explicitly stated many times better. And I don't know why that weighs on me, but it does. But anyway, I had this idea, and according to ChatGPT anyway, it's not at least in common discussion. I can't find it through Google. There's this Girardian idea. Rene Girard has this idea that part of the mimetic structure of how we operate as a social species is that, and I've not read enough of him to really understand his arguments here in some sense, in some areas, so I'm sure I'm going to get some of this wrong. But basically, we learn what to desire from observing others. We copy others mimetically. And the inauthenticity of these values that we absorb, coupled with, I suppose, the compromised way we live, leads us to develop guilt and shame that has to be disgorged periodically in a scapegoating ritual. And in his view, the history of civilization is the history of both scapegoating rituals writ large in the form of horrible things, violence against a group, for example, or an individual, maybe on a smaller scale. But then also, I think he interprets the development of some religions in the context of dealing with this scapegoating need. If you've got human society, it needs this. Of course, it's obvious that you would think of this in the context of the story of Christ or the promise of the Messiah. Jesus, in particular, being a God who dies, seems really quite on the nose with this. Anyway, I was thinking about this, or I don't know what the hell I was doing, but an idea occurred to me that maybe one source of the dynamism of what we call the West, and maybe I should just restrict this argument to America, which I know better, but I really do think it's kind of a Western thing. I think it's going back a few centuries, is that we constantly dynamically scapegoat the past. And so instead of there being a group that we destroy and a cycle of violence that we unleash, the object of our scapegoating, projected guilt and shame and everything is our own ancestors and their traditions and the institutions they've built, our own history. And I think I think, especially just thinking about American history, we do often have others. We very often have others in our midst. And we very, very often nowadays have others in our immediate past or sometimes our more distant past. And I think basically you could imagine the West, therefore, as being mimetically dynamic and productive in this way, where there's, I think, a parallel between scapegoating your own past and constantly sort of trying to destroy its symbols, destroy everything it passed on as knowledge, destroy all of its concepts and its language, and the
Right.
perpetual revolution of science, which is kind of doing the same thing to science, and the perpetual revolution of capitalism, which is doing the same thing to business. You're just kind of, you show up on the scene and you go, I could do better than this. This isn't good enough. Let's do better. And you could see how that trio would be just like a crazy engine for progress. And then also would necessarily mean a bunch of the shit we all fucking hate about the West. How, by the time you're in your 30s, you can already tell that your generation's values are going to be loathed and destroyed, and nothing can be built that has any permanence. And we all grew up without any guidance or sense of location or place or purpose, and every single person has to improvise a whole cultural imaginary for themselves based on the scraps of the present, and no one can look to the past successfully, or very few in a society, and even the past is always being relitigated and reinterpreted, and people are rising and falling. And anyway, I just thought, I wonder if that's just because the real mechanism for the West is the scapegoating of the past, and that's what unlocks all of this, like, hey man, we just got to ferret out the bad shit and start some new shit. I'm sure I'm overstating it, but that's what I was thinking about.
So in your telling, the the villain, the scapegoat, the person that we all blame and ritually destroy is our own past or our imagined past. And on the one hand, you could see this in sort of like, the it's very on the nose if we're tearing down statues of American founders or things like that. But also when you're telling this could actually be a good thing because it's causing us not to not hold sacred, cling to the things that we grew up with or were taught. And in fact, you might benefit from being willing to reject, and that's part of the like engine of progress as we understand it. How do you
Yeah,
draw the
I,
line?
I
I mean, it seems like that could be very good or very bad, right? Like there's an iconoclasm where we're just like, let's fuck it, let's burn it all to the ground. That I think we might agree is not productive.
Oh, certainly. And I think, but that's the sort of the what you see in the West is because of this constant activity, there's a constant meta preoccupation with whether that exact thing is happening. And I mention this all the time. I may have even told you this before. There's a crazy good documentary about the history of New York City on Amazon Prime, made by Rick Burns, who is Ken Burns' brother, which I find to be such a funny detail. I have to mention it every time. But Rick Burns made this great documentary. And when you watch it, one of the things that's really hard to not notice is that every single moment of New York's history has been exactly like New York's present. And every single moment of America's history has been exactly like America's present. And it gives you the sense that, like, what's bad about it is obviously deeply connected with what's good about it. And I think, as you know, that's a theory I have about individuals too. I basically believe in not only spiky distributions, but that all virtues come with vices, and not always vice versa, but ideally. And so I find this pretty easy to believe that, there's a thing about the West, which is that its problems are extremely well described. We're like hundreds of years into people talking about alienation, for example, but we're not really making any progress on alienation. And at a certain point, I think what I sense is that there's a macro revealed preference, which is that the conditions that lead to alienation are so productive in so many other domains that, foolishly or not, I'm not taking a position on whether this is like a good call for the human soul or the human spirit or the human mind. I just know that I think most of us over and over again, actually, crisp version of this. Everybody talks about, I have kids. It's so fucking hard to raise kids without family. And you wish you were in an extended community of people you'd known 30 or 40 years. The magic of that, the incredible power and aid of that would be so great. So would you like everyone to live where they're born? Oh, hell no. Absolutely not, man. I got to be able to go where I go and where my people are. That's psychotic. Are you crazy? No, there could never be a law or a rule or a norm that's the case. Well, so you get alienation, and you also get dynamic allocation of talent to better markets and cities and all that. So it's like, as you know, I'm real into Faust these days, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, this is what it is. This is what it is.
The devil's bargain.
Yeah, yeah. And I love stuff, so I'm hanging in.
In this tell, you've also come back. You've gone back to New Orleans. I've noticed.
I have gone back to New Orleans. I have gone back to New Orleans. New Orleans is really off the map in all these terms, because it's like it's not it's not it's hard to perceive progress unfolding from within New Orleans. I
Do you
think
feel
I've
more or less alienated?
Well, boy, that's a great question. I've noticed in the course of my life that I rebuild my alienation wherever I go. You know what I mean? So
It's
I
like the
don't.
reverse of how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to
Yes,
feel weird and then get accustomed, and you do the reverse.
I always do the reverse. Yeah, I'm a sort of a, I think, and I don't say it with pride or shame. I'm contrarian, and everywhere I go, eventually I start to project everything I dislike about myself onto the environment in different ways. Obviously, all in different ways. In New Orleans, I often feel sort of this is going to sound maybe weird in the context of how you know me, but I often feel like ashamed of what a loser I am. Like as crazy as that is, I'll be like, God, I'm such a fucking loser. I'm like a nerd. Oh, people down here are often very natural and vital, and they know how to have fun, and they're expansive and confident, and in all these ways that are just not. They've never really been my natural way, and so. I feel alienated on that vector. I will say, in a lot of ways, I do feel more at home here. I never feel one thing that I felt in New York and California, which isn't their fault at all. When I'm here, anytime I'm feeling something like ashamed of what a weirdo I am or something, there's a part of me that goes, man, who gives a shit? I'm fucking from here. And you don't get that anywhere but where you're from. I don't get, nobody can push me out of here. I'm from like right here.
That's cool.
I do like that.
Okay, back to your grand theory of the past as scapegoat. Would you extend this to you can decide how far back you go before it's a scapegoat, right? You can say, you know, maybe the like classic American conservative position is like, you know who sucks? The king.
Yeah,
But then you
yeah.
can go back and
Yeah.
you can go back and find injustice in any era. And then if you keep going and bring it further and further, eventually you're like, you know who fucking sucked? Us in 2012.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yeah.
It does
I
kind of
think
feel
there's
like
an
we've been through a wave of that, maybe.
doesn't it feel like this? Okay, so this is something I have no theory for. If you have one, I'd love to hear it. I mean, I guess the default theory is technology is doing it, but like it feels like it's accelerating. So like there's a period, and I think this is exactly what you always see litigated. One of the famous, now it's a meme basically. You'll see a situation where someone will lament the state a problem in the world today, and someone like Steven Pinker will say, "But look how much better it was than 1,000 years ago." And the litigation over what frame of reference to use is really a fight over who's going to be scapegoated. I often think that somebody like Pinker, his scapegoat would be nature, entropy, right? Like what he's mad about is the things we can't control that lead to evil because of a lack of knowledge. It's not personalized necessarily for him, maybe, although it could be. I don't know. I don't know Pinker. But for other people, they want the focus, the scapegoat, to be on something that they think is connected to what can be defeated and changed, something that involves the levers of power in society. So, like when you look at it, what your frame of reference is, I think that's all pretty contested. But yeah, I think if you go back really, really far, it's always us. It's all like I used to think about this as a kid all the time. The way people talk about life and society and the world, you'd think somebody was doing shit to us, but it's only us on this planet. There's like nobody here except for us, and that's but people talk about it like, oh my god, we got to find the motherfuckers.
Yeah. What isn't the point of scapegoating that it's not really the people in power or the people responsible? It's kind of like finding a victim and you know giving all of the blaming them for all of the evils.
Well, this
And
is what's so
then
cool about the past. Think about how good the past is for this, how fertile it is for this. Whatever memeplex of things is currently like the focus of your society's guilt and shame. There's something in the past, probably immediate, if not a little distant, that absolutely can go there, where you can kind of go, this is all because of that. This is all because of them. This got unleashed because of them. It's all, these kind of
right.
the origin stories of what's wrong with the world. And it's not even unreasonable, right? Like the past does structure the present. So I think the past, it's like part of me wants to marvel at the genius of this mechanism because it's like, yeah, we're just going to do this forever. But then of course I'm getting old. And so like, I don't like this mechanism now.
Wait a
I
minute.
see,
Wait a minute. It
yeah,
me.
right. I'm going into the maw. My world is going into the maw. Increasingly, you identify with the people who are now loathed, and you just go, oh, right. They were all just trying. And the thing is, the reason everybody has guilt to disgorge, and the reason, for example, like you might hate the past for injustice, is that I think anybody no matter where they are on any spectrum, can admit none of us is trying that hard to help people who deserve to be helped to exist. None of us.
What about the effective altruists?
They might be, some of those people are, but most of, I mean, ordinary people. You know what I mean? Like, just like, or no, really, like those. Some of those people, they like work real hard and set aside a bunch of their money and then think real hard about where it's going to do the most good. I don't know about other people. I don't really do that. I like Google like what's a good charity to give to, and I give some money to charity, and I also blow a ton of money on just complete entertainment for myself. And I'll rationalize this entertainment in any number of ways. I'll do whatever it takes to have my way. I'm basically a vortex of self-servingness, and I think I get why you would want to be like, whose fault that is. It's my fucking grandparents. But like, that's like, I don't know. I think one of the big questions is always like, are you somebody who engages in scapegoating, behavior or not? And I don't know if that's like I don't know if I do, and I don't know who it is if I do. Um, but yeah.
I'm trying to think what I should ask about this. What should we do? What does this lead? Does this lead you to any conclusions, or is it just like an interesting observation?
I don't know. It's like I wouldn't want to. I would never tell a civilization how to operate. It seems like I think maybe
No,
it's
this
like a
is
good.
Substack. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Hey, listen, man, I got a great idea for the world. First off, the capital of the world should be in New Orleans. I think about this is actually, Chris. I don't know if you have these really dumb fantasies. This is like a fantasy I'll think about all the time. Like my ideal configuration of the world, the everything flows out of New Orleans. This is the center of everything. I love that idea. Like in the future, maybe when we're colonizing space, this is the spaceport. It'll never happen, of course, but that's what I like to fantasize about. What should we do? I think it's good. This is an open question, but I think to some extent it's always good to be aware of what is happening, what might be motivating different kinds of thought or different categories of thought. I remember when I was a teenager, I was really attracted to this thing that Kundera talks about all the time, which is basically related to this. He doesn't, it's not in Girardian terms, but he talks a lot about how people just like invade the past and then like loot anything they want from it for their own purposes to make themselves feel good, superior, powerful, intelligent. And how it's a kind of a crazy disrespectful thing to do. If you see it done to someone you care about, you're like, oh, that's fucked up. They're not even here, man. But when you see it happen in general, it's just part of the symbol scape where we're all just playing with symbols and concepts and words and stuff, and nothing's that consequential. And anyway, I was attracted to that whole world of thinking in him when I was a kid, and I never really understood why. And I think it's like they do seem, you know, they are us. The past is us. Like it's interesting. I guess the thing is, if you're aware of the scapegoating mechanism, you can interrogate whether you've selected a good scapegoat in the past. And I think maybe what you and I would probably both hope is that people would then think, am I in fact that different from the people of the past? Am I in fact, or for example, am I like every generation before me, using certainty to lead me to violence? Just to take one example that you see in world history constantly. People are certain of a set of theories. That set of theories tells them that only violence can happen. So violence happens. And then afterward, when everybody's like soaked in blood and it's all rubble and shit, everybody goes, God damn, man, war's never the answer. And then you get some number of decades of war's never the answer. And then guess what? War's the answer again. And,
Yeah,
I assume
there's
a
a new
repetitive
generation.
scapegoating mechanism is part of that.
I think certainty as the enemy is really interesting. I think there's like a through line to, you know, Deutsch we talk about constantly, and just like general like this scientific rational project of, because this is what science is. Science is not any one story about how the world works. Science is the idea that you cannot be certain.
Yeah.
Um, and that anytime you've become certain, you've actually gone off track and you no
Yeah.
longer have a mechanism for correcting. And I think that's, to me, that's very interesting when you start to talk about oughts instead of ises, where if you leave the domain of stories of if the scientific project is understanding how the world is, and we've developed this meta project that is by far the best and most fruitful way to do that, which is this scientific Popperian process of letting bad ideas be destroyed by the truth, and is not is implacably opposed to dogmatic attachment to any one idea. Um, is there anything like that for morality, for religion, for that universe? It feels like we're in a pre-scientific. Feels to me like we're in a pre-scientific flow for that, but that the same intuitively to me the same principle feels true. If you become somebody who feels absolute moral certainty, that's very dangerous.
Pretty risky, man.
And I don't know if we have like a way to think about that or talk about that. What do you make of that?
I think this
I
is
think
like this is it's an eternal question, and it's really I don't know. You mentioned being pre-scientific, and I never know. As you know, I'm sort of a crypto dualist, and so I never know if we're pre-scientific or if it'll never be a scientific matter. I'm open to the idea that human value and human values are truly in a separate domain permanently. Um, Non-overlapping magisteria, I think Stephen Jay Gould put it. But I don't know. That would be another thing I would never lay claim to certainty about. Actually, I'll mention this just because it's so crazy. You had mentioned in Slack that we might talk about religion too. I'll give you an example of how religion gives me a sort of an out for a lot of these questions. Um, the question of whether morality will someday be subject to scientific scrutiny is a question that I think many people would consider adjacent to religious questions because it bears so much on the human soul, the human psyche, human value. So I think a lot of people are really anxious about that. And for example, you'll see other believers say, no, that could never be empirical. And I think you'll see a lot of very smart materialists and empiricists say, well, that's a quite a bold claim. Are you really prepared to defend what that claim means in all kinds of other domains and let that ripple through the world? And my out there is, it wouldn't surprise me if it fucking became empirical. I don't really consider reality like a totally stable substrate. I have no idea what's going on with its unfolding or creation. I have no idea what's going on with time. I'm not saying that I walk around every day operating from a position of total mystical stupefaction, but I guess I would say I accept the world as, for example, you and I would share a sense of it to like 90% or 80%, or I consider that it covers 90% or 80% of cases. And that's fine for me. And so, whenever I encounter one of these crazy, difficult razors, I'm often like, well, I don't know. I don't know what it'll be like in the future. I don't know what it was like in the past. Right now, yeah, we don't have an empirical grasp of morality. And I think that you mentioned them, the effective altruists, they try so hard to define good proxies and things, basically, the value of human life, things like that. And I think they do really impressive work. People like me often hate them because they consider it like an evil project. But I feel about them the exact same way I feel about psychiatrists, which is like, we really don't know shit about this. And I'm really glad somebody is willing to kind of show their ass and get out there and try to figure it out, because that's probably how we'll figure anything out, if there's anything to be figured out about it. And if not, I'm not super worried about being deeply misled. I know some people are, but like, they're just doing their best. So anyway, no, I don't know if it's going to get objective. I really don't.
yeah, it's interesting because to me, there's two things that there's two types of projects you could hope for. One is a unifying, bridging the is ought distinction. This is, I think Sam Harris does this. I don't know if I won't try to give his view on it, but my impression is ultimately like you can derive an ought from an is. Basically, it's like
Yeah.
that's in principle, of course, that's going to be doable, and yeah, the mechanics may be a little bit hazy, but of course that's just how it has to work. Another tack you could take potentially is, okay, these are non-overlapping magisteria, and the science we've developed a process for one of them that actually is different and good. The scientific method, the Popperian falsifying understanding of the world, judge it by its outcomes. That shit works,
Yeah.
and we just don't have that fully for the other one. Or maybe, okay, everybody who has any shreds of respect for me, please leave the Zoom, because I'm gonna get into some real like stone freshman shit here.
Yeah.
But I mean, is this what liberalism is a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to
Where
say, I think a Hegelian might say that.
where you say, look, we're gonna not the this meta framework is not going to take a position on which stories are true in the analogous theory of which things are right, which ways to live are correct. Instead, we're going to come up with a meta framework that allows for discovery, allows for progress. And there's a few like maybe parallels there where one of them is that it's a strong link problem where it's more important, a strong link problem as opposed to a weak link problem, where it's more important to, like in the realm of science, it's more important, the quality of the best ideas matters and the quality of the worst ideas doesn't matter over time. Like you want to create a situation where things that are things that work and are true or good can be sheltered to allowed to exist and then can come to uh, succeed. So maybe I don't know, the analogy here is like you give people freedom, you give people space within some bounds, and you essentially say like, you're betting your own life on this.
Mhm.
you are you get to figure this thing out. It's the common project we all share. There's a bunch of stuff that you can there's a bunch of tools laying around that you can try, but you are going to be alienated. You're not going to be forced into any one thing.
Mm.
And that is not only potentially like a morally good thing to do or potentially like an attractive market winning thing to do from like a people will choose it with their revealed preference, but when you set a larger system up that way, it doesn't prevent bad things from happening, it doesn't prevent bad ideas, none of that, but it does set up a meta system where over time you can make progress.
Mm. I think that's right. I think it's interesting because it then kind of one way to think about the scapegoating mechanism in that context is it's like an enforced research regime. It's almost like saying we're going to update the science in this area, right? Like it's like that each generation of Americans, for example, goes, I'm not going to be like my parents. Now that you and I are parents, I don't know if you've noticed this. There's a very funny thing about the mimetic landscape for children's entertainment, which is that it almost uniformly shows the necessity of differentiating yourself from your parents and their way of life. It's
Mhm.
an extremely common meme that one or both parents is either foolish or hidebound, wedded to, for example, King Triton is ludicrously determined that Ariel remain a mermaid. And all obvious evidence in the movie suggests that any person of normative sentimental disposition should want her to be a human. And so she does become a human. And this is a really common thing. And the reason I think about it is that Kizzy asks me about it all the time. She'll literally say stuff like, how come so many dadas don't know anything? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that. And I think obviously there's a conservative line on this that you hear, which is that corporations or bad people are trying to destroy the family. They fucking wish. They wish there was just a group of people trying to destroy the family. The truth is, in the West, this is what happens to every generation. And I don't know where it comes from. And that's what makes it feel Girardian to me, is that every generation just pops out of the wombs and turns around and goes, man, fuck this shit. I don't want to wind up like my old man or my and girls say, I don't want to wind up like my mom. Oh my God, my mother. That's one of the deepest things I remember about myself is just kind of going, well, look, there's a lot of possibilities here on earth, but that's not one I want. What? Why? Why didn't I grow up going, I want to be like him? I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know where that came from. I don't know who. I think blaming someone for that seems crazy. That seems like it happens in every demographic with all kinds of people, even people who like their parents a lot, even people who come from pretty nice homes. They just kind of go, well, I'll tell you one thing. This ain't the path. It's like the one thing that's almost universal. Why?
Is that universal or is that a type of guy that we are? Like, what about your cool New Orleans friends?
Oh no. None of them wanted to be like their folks. None of them. And what's funny is all of us have wound up basically exactly like our folks in some areas at least. And everybody kind of regards it with amusement. I think that when you're in middle age, the mimetic fight is different. You're not engaged in that zone anymore. But no, when they were young, man, they all I can't think of any. No, in fact, man, for at least two of them, it was like a central motivating psychological thing to not be like my parents.
Okay, but in that case, is that actually a human universal? Like, if you told me that
Don't know.
teenagers rebel against their parents in all times, I would at least find that pretty plausible.
I think I would too. This is one of those things that I'm an eternalist, and so like most human psychological phenomena. I feel like if you just read some stuff from Sophia's era,
Sophia's era,
it,
ancient
it
Greece, where she used to
ancient
live.
ancient Greece where her buddies lived. It's all there, but I don't know. One thing is the pace of change in society certainly used to be different. And I think probably there's something going on where like technologies have sped the rate of mimetic propagation such that like the most rebellious teenager now gets that copy. I remember the feeling as a teenager of needing extremity. I didn't like bands. I fucking loved this band. It's like there's some striving that I don't really know the source of, and maybe it is universal hormonally driven adolescence. I have no idea, but striving to be like the peak of the mimetic landscape. you know
Super interesting. All right, I think we should probably declare victory.
okay, we did
We
it.
should do this
Hi,
again, man. This is fun.
hi everybody. I'm sorry I missed the chat, but we need to be able to export these chats, man, because I want to be able to read them and like reply. They should turn into like little comment threads on the post.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea. Sweet. All
All
right.
right, man. See you
Thanks.
soon.
Cheers.